I guess I never really lived until I turned 64, I thought to myself. David, what did he hold me back from all these years? What did I deprive myself of? This questioning inside me felt like both a rebuke and an awakening. Bruce didn't say anything, he just watched me. And that gave me courage. He supported me, not with his hands, but with his eyes. As my fingers slowly grabbed the straps and pulled them down. Oh, hi there. Didn't see you there. I was just telling a little story about what we went through. Let me start over so you can get the full picture of how it all unfolded. I was 64 years old, and honestly, I never thought something as innocent as cleaning up would lead to this, all thanks to my step-grandson suddenly showing up. It had been 12 years since my husband David passed away, leaving me feeling lonely and widowed for far too long. It was late morning when I finally decided to tackle the one thing I'd been putting off for years, cleaning out the basement, that chaotic little corner of the house that I avoided every time it crossed my mind, the thought of it tightening my chest. But I'd gathered the courage to face it, that dusty room full of old boxes, musty-smelling junk, and memories of a lifetime. The first box I opened revealed something that caught me completely off guard, an old photo album from my younger days. As I flipped through it, one particular photo stood out. It was from a beach party. There I was, holding a margarita in one hand, wearing a bright orange bikini, laughing like I didn't have a care in the world. A carefree young Elizabeth, beaming with joy, stared back at me. Looking at that photo stirred something inside me. It was a mix of warmth and sadness. Memories I'd buried long ago, desires and excitement I'd suppressed, all came rushing back. And just then, I heard a sound coming from the basement door. Startled, I turned around to see Bruce, my step-grandson, standing there. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. He looked broader now, more grown up, with that familiar smile of his. The last time I saw him, he was 23. Now he must have been 27. "Surprise," he said, lifting a coffee cup in the air. "Bruce, when did you get here?" I asked, caught off guard, but genuinely happy to see him. "Just now," he replied, making his way down the stairs. "Saw your car outside and figured I'd come in. Looks like you could use some help." I was about to say, "No, I've got this." But before I could, he'd already walked over, a determined look on his face for someone so young. His eyes landed on the album I was holding. "What's this?" he asked, before I could snatch the photo out of his hand. I froze for a moment. His eyes were locked on that picture of young Elizabeth on the beach. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity before turning to me. Is this you?" "Well, yeah," I said with a nervous laugh. "My wild years back in the day." Bruce's gaze shifted from the photo back to me. There was something in his eyes, a mix of admiration and surprise. It was both unsettling and oddly kind of warming. "Wow. It's weird to think of you like this, but impressive," he said, smiling. "If you're enjoying these little confessions, join me on my channel for more. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because trust me, this story is just getting started, and it's one you won't want to miss." I felt a flicker of something inside me, something I couldn't quite understand. Feelings I had buried for years, emotions David had never truly awakened in me. They surfaced for just a moment. But this wasn't right. It couldn't be. "All right, enough with the trip down memory lane," I said quickly, closing the album. "We've got to start hauling these old boxes out of here." But I had no idea where that photo, Bruce's expressions, and this storm brewing inside me were going to take me. Bruce gently stopped my hands as I tried to close the album. "We really need to look at this," he said, half joking, half serious. "It's unbelievable seeing you so young, vibrant and different. Come on, let's look a little more." I hesitated for a moment. Not all the pictures in that album were innocent. Beyond those carefree beach snapshots, there were bolder photos, moments that captured the wilder side of my youth. But seeing how fascinated Bruce was, and feeling the admiration in his eyes, I couldn't say no. "All right," I said with a small smile. "But some of these photos might be a bit much." Bruce chuckled and nodded. "I'm sure everything's great," he said, taking the album into his lap. As he sat down beside me, his breath was close enough to brush my skin. As we flipped through the pages, the beach party photos gave way to snapshots of my college years in nightclubs. One photo showed me in a tight, backless red dress, dancing tipsily. Bruce lingered on that one, staring at it a little too long. "This is really you?" he asked, his eyes darting between the photo and me, his face lighting up with a mix of awe and curiosity. Yeah, I replied, a little bashfully. It was just youth, you know. Things were different back then. Bruce was silent for a moment before finally saying, "You're incredible." He paused and then added, "All this time I've only ever thought of you as my grandmother, but you were like a total, I don't know, party girl." His words made me blush, but at the same time they stirred something inside me. I thought about how David had never shown me that kind of admiration. Even when I was younger, he'd always been distant, cold, and strict. But Bruce, he was different. The look in his eyes told me more than his words ever could. As we kept flipping through the album, the photos got bolder. There was one of me laughing with friends, wearing a short pair of shorts and a bikini top. Another showed me dancing in a nightclub in a plunging black dress. Bruce smiled softly and said, "It's a privilege to see these. Even when you were younger, your beauty was breathtaking. David was one lucky man." His words warmed me, but they also made me feel something else, something strange. The more I felt Bruce's attention, his interest, the more I realized there was a pull between us. He was like the kind of man I had dreamed of when I was younger, confident, openly admiring, and eager to discover the parts of me I'd kept hidden. When we reached the last page, Bruce closed the album but didn't move his eyes from me. "Elizabeth," he said in a low voice, "you're truly extraordinary." I was surprised and moved by his words. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me that way or said things like that to me. As my eyes locked with Bruce's, I felt the air between us grow heavier. Something was shifting. Despite the cold, dusty atmosphere of the basement, a warmth rose inside me. Bruce's presence was making me feel young again. At the same time, I had no idea where these feelings were taking me. When Bruce closed the album and turned to me, there was still that deep admiration in his eyes. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low but completely sincere. "After seeing all those pictures, I have to say this. You haven't aged a day. You still look young and absolutely beautiful." The compliment took my breath away for a moment. Even in my youth, I wasn't used to hearing words like that, especially not from David. My heart beat a little faster, and I felt a slight warmth creeping into my cheeks. "Thank you, Bruce," I said. "But there's no hiding the fact that I've aged. Still." I paused for a moment, gathering my courage before continuing. "Maybe I've gotten older, but I haven't lost touch with my desires. I've never let go of them." Bruce smiled, his green eyes locked on mine, unwavering. "I can feel that," he said. "You're not just beautiful, you're absolutely captivating." I couldn't help but let my eyes wander over his broad athletic frame for a moment. His tall stature, wide shoulders, and slightly curled blonde hair gave him the air of a movie star. But what struck me the most was the confident yet gentle expression in his green eyes. "It's interesting, hearing something like that from someone like you," I said. Smiling faintly, I added, "David was nothing like you. He was always so calm, so distant. He never did anything to truly surprise or excite me. He was a good man, but—" Bruce tilted his head, listening intently. "But not the kind of man you desired, right?" he asked. I thought about looking away but couldn't. "Yeah," I said honestly. "David was never as exciting or passionate as I wished he could be. I'm not saying he was a bad man, but I always felt like something was missing." Bruce was quiet for a moment before giving me a gentle yet confident smile. "Maybe it's important you realize that," he said. "Maybe now's the time to figure out what fills that void." His words lit a spark inside me. The way this young man was showing interest in me, understanding me, and speaking so confidently, it stirred an excitement I hadn't felt in years. In that moment, I realized Bruce wasn't just different from David. He was also incredibly close to the kind of man I used to dream about in my youth. But I didn't know where these feelings would take me, or if they were even the right direction to go in. After a pause, Bruce stood up and slid his hands into his pockets. His green eyes settled on me again. "I'm going to put the bike in the garage and come right back," he said with a steady voice. "But don't stay in the basement, Elizabeth. Wait for me in the living room, all right?" The confidence in his tone and the way he took charge left an unusual effect on me. I nodded slightly, agreeing. "All right, Bruce," I said. Bruce walked upstairs with quick steps, and as I watched him go, I found myself thinking about how even his love for his motorcycle was affecting me. I imagined how he might look while working on it or riding it, energetic, passionate, determined. Exactly the kind of man I used to dream about when I was younger. He's so much like the person I always imagined, I murmured to myself. But he's my step-grandson, and yet right now, he's really having an effect on me. I moved to the living room and waited. It wasn't long before Bruce returned holding a bottle of wine. The moment my eyes landed on the label, I recognized it immediately. It was my favorite wine, rosé. I had no idea how he knew or why he thought of it, but once again, I felt a spark ignite inside me. "I got this from the best place I could find," he said with a slight smile. "I hope you like it." "Like it?" I said, surprised. "Bruce, this is my favorite wine. How did you know that?" He shrugged, a look on his face that suggested he didn't really want to explain. "I noticed little things when I was younger. I guess I remembered right." I paused for a moment. The fact that this young man had remembered so much about me was deeply touching. "Bruce," I said softly, "this wine is really special and so thoughtful." "Thank you." He opened the bottle, poured it into 2 glasses and handed one to me. "Then let's share some good memories tonight, Elizabeth," he said. I raised my glass, and we toasted. As I took the first sip, the unique taste of the rosé danced on my tongue, and I couldn't help but keep my eyes on Bruce. As the conversation flowed, I found myself drawn to him, not just for how he looked, but also for the way he thought and carried himself. At one point, when our glasses were nearly empty, Bruce's eyes locked onto mine once again. There was a warmth in his gaze, a pull I couldn't ignore. Inside me, I felt something shifting, a mix of fear and excitement, but I still had no idea where these feelings were leading me. Suddenly, Bruce paused. He set his glass down on the table and turned his eyes back to me. This time, his gaze was more determined, more intense. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low, but filled with emotion he couldn't hide. I looked at him and realized my breathing had quickened. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Yes, Bruce?" I whispered, my voice barely audible as if it couldn't manage more. In that moment, Bruce reached for my hand. The warmth of his fingers moving gently over my delicate, slender hand sent a rush of emotions through me. "I know I shouldn't say this, but," he began. "When I look at you, I just can't stop myself. You're not just incredibly beautiful. You're so much more than I ever imagined." His words echoed somewhere deep inside me, and I felt my face flush. "Bruce, you—" I started, but before I could finish, he hesitated for just a moment before leaning in. That moment, my heart felt like it was about to stop. Watching him move closer, I knew I should say no, but I couldn't fight the powerful pull I felt toward him. When his lips touched mine, slow and deliberate, the world seemed to pause for an instant. That kiss. It was gentle but also deep. I felt desires I'd suppressed for years suddenly come flooding back. As his strong hands moved to my waist, I let myself fully surrender to the moment. When Bruce's lips pulled away from mine, I could feel the tension between us lingering in the air. My heart was still pounding like crazy. I looked at him, hoping my eyes could somehow express what I was feeling. But putting those emotions into words seemed impossible. In that moment, driven by an impulse I couldn't ignore, I leaned in and kissed him again. This time it was me making the move. As my lips pressed against his once more, something inside me felt alive again. Bruce seemed a little surprised at first, but he quickly responded. Our kiss became deeper, more passionate. His hand slid to my waist, his strong fingers pulling me closer with a gentle yet firm touch. I could feel his warmth radiating through my entire body. As we lay side by side on the couch, there was barely any space left between us. His presence, his breath, everything about him filled the moment completely. Resting against Bruce's chest, a restless feeling began to stir inside me. My heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't fear or hesitation. It was a burning desire to let go completely. I slowly sat up, feeling his curious but calm gaze on me. His eyes, so focused and intense, seemed to understand everything happening inside me without needing a single word. As I stood up, I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding as I let a bold, powerful urge take over. My hands moved to the thin straps of my dress, which had started to feel like chains holding me back. Bruce didn't say a word. He just watched me. And somehow, that gave me courage. He was supporting me, not with his hands, but with his eyes. When my fingers grasped the straps and slowly slid them down, the dress slipped off my shoulders, falling gently to the floor. The fabric pooled around my bare feet like a soft puddle. In that moment, I could finally breathe. It wasn't just a physical act. It felt symbolic, like shedding years of restraint and finally freeing myself. When I turned my gaze back to Bruce, the admiration and awe in his expression were unmistakable. He didn't have to say a thing. He understood. This was me breaking through my own limits, accepting myself fully. Bruce slowly stood up from where he was sitting and reached out his hand toward me. His touch was, as always, both tender and strong. But this time I wasn't just embracing him, I was embracing all of myself. For a full 15 minutes I stayed in that exact position on the couch, barely moving. I was so close to passing out, but somehow I managed to hold on. Maybe it was the years of longing that had built up this strange resilience in me. Bruce's broad, powerful frame had always drawn me in, but now, the intensity of my attraction was on another level entirely. I was left breathless, like I had just left the entire world behind. My heart was racing, my body trembling, and every inch of me felt the impact of his presence. For the first time in my life, I felt physically exhausted in the most exhilarating way. It wasn't a limit. It was a liberation. Even as I was lost in these overwhelming emotions, my mind wandered into a strange reflection. I didn't truly live until now, I thought to myself. David, what did he hold me back from all these years? What did I deny myself for so long? This inner questioning felt like both a quiet rebellion and a long overdue awakening. Bruce, still catching his breath, ran a hand through his hair. Seeing that he was just as affected as I was, somehow comforted me. He gave a faint smile, fixing his tousled hair, and in a low voice he said, "I'm going to take a shower." In that moment, I felt the sparkle in his eyes, the softness in his voice, and the calm determination behind it all. And just like that, everything became even more real. I watched Bruce walk away, but my mind stayed stuck on what had just happened and the bittersweet joy of discovering myself so late in life. If you've made it this far, I know my story has left an impact on you. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss any of it. Make sure to hit that follow button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about this story. I can't wait to hear your thoughts, so let's chat in the comments. Your support means the world to me.